The following program is a Town of Colonie television production of the William K. Sanford Town Library.
Welcome to An Open Door on the Arts. My name is Barbara Richer, and I am your host as we travel the Capital Region, meeting the amazing artists that so enrich our life. Now, we have something a little bit different today. We are starting a three-part interview with some incredibly interesting men who have done amazing work in the Capital Region. And this latest project, I think, is one that we should all be interested in and hopefully be able to see within a relatively short period of time. We're going to be talking to Tom Mercer and Anthony Vertucci. They have been here in the Capital Region as writers, directors, and independent filmmakers for a good period of time. Tom is the regional co-founder of the regional chapter of the Association of Independent Video and Filmmakers. And Anthony has been in marketing, production, and film, and is currently the director of development for Magic Week Productions up here in Saratoga. And they're both working with and founders of Talon Film. We will have a website for you to go to at the end of this, so you'll be able to put all of these names together. Suffice to say, they're incredibly talented. They've been working on this amazing play, film about Benedict Arnold, the man, the movie, the Battle of Saratoga, and the American Revolution. It's my great, great pleasure to welcome you here. This is such an exciting endeavor.
Pleased to be here, Barbara.
Thank you for having us.
We're going to try and break this into three sort of distinct segments, but I'm sure one will run right into the other. As you pointed out, we can talk first, and probably really should talk first, about why Benedict Arnold. You know, that conjures different things to different people, but clearly there's a very good reason that you chose Benedict Arnold for this documentary film. Tom, why don't you take that?
Benedict Arnold, his name is well known. He has great name recognition. Everybody thinks they know who he is. His name lives in infamy. His name is synonymous with traitor. But there is another side to the story. And we want people to understand the other side. We want them to understand that context in which his treason, return of allegiance to the crown, what is the context that fits into? And to understand Benedict Arnold, he's a window to the American Revolution and many, many aspects of the political intrigue that was happening behind the scenes during the war period, as well as very important battles on the ground. To understand Benedict Arnold is to get a real interesting look at all that.
And all that happened, I mean, he was presenting that look and that possibility of seeing it through his life and everything before he made a fateful decision. And
Absolutely.
So it really is important to look at what came before. How did you become involved in what can you tell me about Benedict Arnold, Anthony?
To me, his story, I think, why we think the story is so relevant today is that, you know, even in today's political environment, you have the very same issues that were occurring back then, before we were even really a country. And that's this constant struggle between civilian and military wings of any government. So, you know, when we started evaluating the story way back then, we thought that boy, what an interesting subject matter that would be alone. But once you start investigating his life, and you start investigating all of the impact that he had on the revolution and the birth of the country, it's really hard to avoid his story. So for us, we had been friends and we had been active in the film community up here for many, many years. And we found out just one day that we all kind of shared in common to learn the real history of the area because we all grew up here.
Right.
But more importantly, we all kind of harbored this hidden admiration for the man and his military exploits, and that all just happened to come out when we were together one day at his camp. And we don't even remember which one of us said it, but we're like, oh boy, that'd make a great documentary.
Great documentary.
Well, away we go.
Well, I have to admit, just since I've met you and we've been talking about this, I went back and started doing my own research because you're right. Unfortunately, we just learn of Benedict Arnold as the traitor. That's the piece that most of us walk out of high school, college, whatever we walk out of. That's what we hold in our mind. And unfortunately, there are folks like you that need to bring it back to us again and say, wait a minute, I think you've missed some of the beginning things, because clearly that's not where he started.
No, and the word treason itself, which we're going to explore in this interview probably a little bit later, but what exactly does that word mean in the context of the times? And one of the places where we always find issues in talking to people who are trying to understand or evaluate what this period of American history meant to them is that they generally filter all the decisions that these people made through the contemporary lens of their own time, which is always dangerous to do because the political and moral issues that these men were dealing with back then are completely different than they are today. No less powerful or no less meaningful, but different.
Right.
So we've always kind of felt that part of our mission as educators and filmmakers is to help people see this story in the context of their times and not their own.
So when we're looking at why Benedict Arnold, we're not going to just jump to this is the man in the American Revolution. Will we see a bit of what makes him so compelling and what brought him to? We
deal with his background and his motives for joining the cause of independence in the very first place. He was really a very wealthy and successful merchant trader before the Revolution. And he felt like joining that cause for independence would be committing to an idealism of a new way of, an entirely new way of life, a new order, a new system, where a person's merit would be recognized and rewarded, rather than just being born to the right family or having the right connections. As a British colony, America was still under that aristocratic type of top-down governance, where opportunities for individuals were not that good. And
unless you brought a name and recognition and power and everything.
Title. Because Arnold came originally from a very, very prominent family, but had fallen into disgrace. His father was an alcoholic, and the family was disgraced in the community and in the church. So Arnold was always trying to overcome that lost reputation, and it was very hard to do at that time, to pull your reputation back up. Very sensitive to his reputation.
I hadn't realized that until I did some reading and discovered that his siblings, his brother died. There was death in the family. His father really went off the tracks and was alcoholic, and although Benedict Arnold was to go off to Yale, that didn't happen. It could never happen. And so he was left really with his mother and sister and whoever else was left after his father died to take care of the family, and all that upper level opportunity was just kind of yanked away from him.
He was basically placed into, some would call a servitude by being part of an apothecary trade. It was really the only option that was left for him once he realized that he couldn't go to a university, go to college like Yale. So that kind of plaguing self-doubt was with him always until the day he died.
And that makes even more sense when you're thinking of him looking at the military and what it was at that time at being merit-based, where he didn't need all those things
Right.
that he had lost, where he, on his own, could be recognized.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
He thought that this new country
Right.
would be based on merit, and that the new army would be based on
Right.
merit. And he used his own money to raise a militia group that went off to fight. And he was committed to the ideals. He had his men sign a pledge of honor before they marched off. He was involved in this because it was a cause that really spoke to him on a deep personal level, and he was willing to commit his blood and his treasure to it. He came from modest beginnings, but he had made himself one of the richest men in the colonies, but still only an outsider in the aristocratic community.
What happened in his early military times that was so discouraging to him?
It was later, not so much as
Okay.
early military
Okay.
times.
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
during the beginning when he volunteered his time, his funds, I mean, because he basically took a lot of his own money and put it into the cause, and that's something that people rarely mention when they talk about his story. I mean,
He actually went in debt, didn't he?
people who are deeply committed actually end up paying for a lot of their troop supplies. He did all that. So yeah, I mean, he was committed militarily and ideally right from the beginning.
It's later that as the army starts to take shape and evolve, and we end up going back to the old system of rewarding people with connections, rewarding the landed gentry with their promotions, and the political intrigue that goes on in Congress, kind of looking over General Washington's shoulder about who gets promoted and when they get promoted, and sensitivity to political favoritism, that he starts to get discouraged.
And James Kirby Martin said it best in one of our interviews. He says it's pretty hard when, I'm paraphrasing, but it's pretty hard when you're an idealist to suddenly come up and realize that the civilian leadership that's overseeing the military is just as he quotes, vain and willful as the people you're fighting against in the opposing army.
Yeah.
That suddenly that's a crushing blow to a high
Of course.
idealist, right?
For an idealist
Yeah.
like
The
Benedict
reality of
Arnold,
the
it must have
situation.
just been
Yeah.
devastating to make that discovery.
Sure.
So where do we go now from here in his life?
Well, he had a very successful early military career. I think to understand kind of where we're talking about, we need to realize that Benedict Arnold is operating in the northern theater of the American Revolution, which is the New York, the Hudson River Valley, the Champlain Valley, on up into Canada, and across Maine into Canada. This is the theater of action of Benedict Arnold. And a very important part of the Revolutionary War history occurs in this northern
area.
theater. It's given short shrift in the history books because you can't really tell that story without telling Benedict Arnold's story, and he's the third rail of American history,
Right.
and nobody wants to touch
Right.
him.
Right.
So we don't hear so much about those very important actions that occurred during the first 3 or 4 years of the Revolution. Instead, we hear about what happens in Boston and Philadelphia and Virginia, and the rest of it is not to be understood.
Not to be mentioned.
And you know, we always joke all the time that the revolution might have began in Massachusetts, but it was won in New York State.
Yes,
We
we could
truly
say
believe
that.
that because if you look at the larger military strategy of the British,
That-
their whole goal was to take this region and essentially cut the colonies in two. It's why they took control of New York City. They wanted to control the Hudson River corridor. Think of it, it would have been the I-95
Of course.
of that era. Suddenly you could have supplies coming in from British-held Canada all the way down to
All
New
the way
York
down
City,
City.
and this entire region. You would have launching pads to get to the heart of New England.
It would have been an entirely different picture had that ever happened.
Absolutely.
So,
That would have been the key to their success in reclaiming
Right.
the colonies.
Right.
And it's Benedict Arnold who repeatedly, year after year, foils that British plan. He takes Fort Ticonderoga, even before the Declaration of Independence is signed. Important fort on Lake Champlain that can block a British invasion, captures that fort. He leads an invasion of Canada through Maine. We'll get back to these, I'm sure, and talk about them in more detail. And he wins an important battle on Battle of Lake Champlain, the Battle of Belcourt, where he stops a British armada from coming down
Right.
the lake to invade the heart of, Albany, really, is what their target was, and then at Saratoga. So year after year, he foils the British.
he's in the thick of things.
Yes.
But what happens with, I don't know if you're ready to say this, but when it came time for recognition and promotions, it's wonderful to hear the way you're explaining it and know that from what I've just recently read, he was so intimately involved in all of those important battles and everything. But when promotions and recognition came around,
Well,
what happened?
Well, this is where one of our greatest founding fathers, the very first president of the country, comes into play, because George Washington admired Benedict Arnold.
He did,
There's
right.
absolutely no doubt that he did. Every single time he asked him to go into the breach, he went. Arnold never refused him. He knew he could count on him militarily. So, Arnold believed in Washington and believed that he was the only person who could really do what Washington wanted to accomplish. So every time he was asked to perform, he did for the country. So, but why Washington's such an important player is that when Washington has counted on him for so long, there came a critical time later in this story where Washington turned his back on him. And, there have been many discussions about whether or not that one event was actually the trigger for him returning his allegiance to Britain. So he plays a part.
Well, and to understand Washington's side of it, there were good reasons why Washington felt he had to do that. So we're not really painting Washington as
Right.
the behind-the-scenes villain. He was in a political context himself.
Right.
That Arnold did not fully understand. Arnold was not politically savvy. He was tactical
And an
brilliant
idealist.
tactically, and an idealist. The political machinations that Washington had to deal with, pulled in so many different directions, he didn't get.
Which is his great strength, as we all know, right? He was able to balance those. He was able to ride that fine line of military and civilian leadership, and he did it, brilliantly.
But it did become complicated for Arnold to sort through not just the recognition, but the status, the income, the raise in ranks, things that were taken away from him by other folks that
He was
were
well
small
deserving.
steps that should have happened.
He was right in feeling slighted because of the lack of promotion. There's absolutely no doubt about it. He deserved it. Washington said as much. You'll learn that in the film. Just to paraphrase again, he's like, I don't think Arnold, writing to the civilian leadership in Philadelphia, I don't think Arnold will continue to fight under this slight. this perceived slight that he's under. He's one of our best generals. We can't keep doing this to him. So Washington was aware that if he didn't help ease the situation, that he could lose one of his most, one of his best generals.
Right.
So, yeah, it was a challenge for sure.
It's this lack of recognition that's behind it, and you put a man who really cares about his reputation and cares about his honor. You put a man like that in a situation like this, and you start to understand how his loyalty could shift. It turns out not to be the cause he thought he was fighting for, and he comes to some conclusions that we would be better off, that the nation would be better off reconciling with England than we would be to continue under the control of these petty and backbiting and really, I don't know, what's the word for how Congress is behaving there, without being too, you get the idea.
Well, they were really, in a sense, taking away his belief system in this country and what he was fighting for. Right. I mean, on a very personal level, they were just pulling it right out from under him. It seemed at that time.
Right.
Yeah, because he believed the high ideals of the revolution, but don't forget, we always talk about how our country is not, it's not old enough yet to be as introspective as perhaps some other countries. So we built up this mythology of what our revolution really is and the people who participated in it. But if you study history and you study the reality of most of the situations, the founding fathers did not have halos on their heads. They had rampant self-interest for starting the revolution as well. And a lot of times, other people fought and died for their ideas and for their self-interest.
Right.
That has not changed throughout human history.
No, it hasn't.
And it's not going to change anytime soon. But we think that once you evaluate these men through that prism, then you can have a more objective understanding of just what it really took to create the country. And that's a good thing.
Right.
It's good to be introspective and to be objective and to look at these men as the men that they are, not the angelic figures that we sort of turn them into.
Right.
And we think if you do that, if you really, really do that, you'll have a deeper appreciation for them. In spite of all their flaws, they were able to create this amazing thing.
And that includes Benedict Arnold.
Right.
Yes.
Right.
In his early life and commitments
Yes.
to this country.
Yeah.
So, why do you think then, in the end, what was it that finally just really catapulted him into a decision? It was a culmination of the.
Well, it was a culmination. To do something like that, you have to have means and opportunity, and motive. Motive means and opportunity. We've talked about his motive.
Right.
The means present themselves with his wife, Peggy Shippen, who has contacts with officers of the British in New York City. So that's maybe in the next interview we can get a little more deeply into Peggy Shippen and her role in creating the opportunity. And the means was available to him by virtue of being assigned to the commandant position of West Point.
Right.
So all those factors come together, and well, as they say, the rest is history.
We have about 5 minutes
About
left
5
in
minutes,
this.
okay.
About
Well, we
5
can go-
minutes left in this segment, and then
Okay.
I want to share it with our audience, remind them, and share with them again. We're going to be doing a series of 3 episodes on the making of this amazing documentary in our region. So we'll be ending up in 5 minutes or so with this, but I want you to know that we're coming back twice more to cover the actual making of the film and the actual Battle of Saratoga. There'll be many amazing things to see, so stay with us. All right, so with about 4 minutes left then, treason, what does that mean?
Well,
You
Well,
go with that.
to me, and again, this goes back to that contemporary filter compared to the times. You'll very seldom hear us actually mention the word treason, because treason is a construct in this country that is matched against what it says in the Constitution.
Okay.
When Arnold returned his allegiance back to Britain, he was a traitor to the British Crown. And I think people lose sight of the fact that all Americans who were fighting for the War of Independence were considered traitors to the Crown.
That's right. I've never heard it put that way.
Yeah.
So
It depends on who wins.
it depends
Who
on who
defines
wins.
treason.
That's right. Very good.
But at the time when he returned his allegiance to Britain, we did not have a constitution. We did not have a Bill of Rights. We weren't even a country yet. We were an ideal of what a country could be.
Right.
So that's why we never really used the word treason, because he didn't do how it's defined today.
Well, many people change their allegiance from time to time during the course of the war. Many people would say, well, it looks like the Patriots are winning. I'm a patriot.
Right.
Looks like the British are winning. Oh, I'm very loyal to the king. So it was always a shifting thing.
flux.
And there was maybe a third of the people were loyalists, and a third of the people were patriots, and a third of the people were in this state of flux or didn't care. So
It was in that
it's kind of
state.
in that context that Arnold changes his allegiance. But what makes it so significant is he's such an important general.
Of course.
He's so important to the revolution. So when he changes his allegiance, it's a
That's
very
a
big deal.
Yeah,
Right.
That's a big deal.
And one example that we use, and I'll say it quickly, is we use this example all the time. If you're looking for a true definition of traitors, then you'd have to look at characters during the Civil War who, like Robert E. Lee, we were a country at the time. Robert E. Lee put his hand on a Bible and swore allegiance to the Union. When he joined Virginia to fight for a state and join the Civil War, he turned his back on the standing president of the United States of America. He turned his back on the Constitution. He turned his back on the country. But his name is never mentioned in the
connection with
same
treason.
breath with treason. And I find that a national tragedy.
It's very, very interesting. Interestingly put that way.
Because hundreds
Yes.
of thousands of men died because of his
Yes.
decision.
Yes, yes. Oh my goodness. We have 2 minutes left in this segment, and I just want to keep on going and keep on going.
But I mean, when we get into debates with other historians and other people who have a very firm opinion about this, that's what we hope the film helps you understand, that no one looks at the Civil War that way.
Right.
They look at it in a completely different way,
Yes.
other than the way that we
Yes.
view it, that it was a national tragedy. You had entire part of the country turn its back on another.
Right.
And the most tragic war in our history occurred because of it. But you still hear flowing, soliloquies
Battle songs,
of the South and its generals. And look, they were brave men. There's not,
and we're not going to change
that's
that.
that's not the argument. But the argument is, if you want to
Take
talk
another look.
if you want to talk about treason, then you really need to evaluate it
Right.
based on fact.
Right, so we should take another look.
Absolutely.
And that's what's so exciting about this documentary, the opportunity to take another look. And maybe not necessarily be persuaded or not persuaded, but to grow, to learn, to take another look. That's what's so exciting about what you're doing and what you're offering. I know we have less than 2 minutes left. So what I'm going to say
Well,
You can wrap up.
Less than 2 minutes, I would like to say something about our website.
Okay.
I want to be able to say this at each episode. If you want to know more about our film and follow its progress and learn when and where you'll have an opportunity to see it, tune in to our website for that kind of information and sign up for our newsletter. The website address is?
The website is Benedict Arnold HeroPortrayed.com, all one word. And we chose the name for our newsletter, the official newsletter, is called the Dark Eagle, and that's what the Iroquois Indians, that was their nickname for Benedict Arnold.
Benedict Arnold.
The Dark Eagle. So we thought that was an appropriate
That's wonderful
name.
for a newsletter.
Yeah.
So I will ask you to, and watch at the end of this because the website address will be on there, and it is again Benedict Arnold HeroBetrayed.com. Sign up for the Dark Eagle newsletter. Stay with us through the next several weeks and watch the coming segments. They're going to be so exciting as we delve even more into the life and times of Benedict Arnold and the tremendous the artistic directors and producers that are bringing this to our region. I look forward to seeing you next time on An Open Door for the Arts.